Welcome to HUSECCon 2024 edition. This is track 8, room 361. Today's speaker is Joe Sarkisian with Den Security by Wolf & Company. The topic's it's breach of clock. Do you know what your MSSP is doing? Joe serves as manager and lead penetration tester on Wolf & Company's Den Secure team, coordinating and conducting penetration testing services across various industries. His expertise includes internal and external network testing, social engineering, vulnerability assessments, and Microsoft Windows security. He's pursuing ethical hacking certifications from recognized organizations like the SANS Institute and Offensive Security. Joe?
Thank you. All right, thanks for coming, everybody. Quick show of hands if you're willing. Who here works for an MSSP? Uh-oh. Well, I have a disclaimer at the beginning. That's particularly so that all of you don't like clothesline me when I'm on my way out the door. So this is me. You just got the long form. This is the short form. I don't know if the slides get made available to everybody at the end of the conference, but some of these links are clickable. None of them are phishing links, I promise. This is us. Red team assessments, threat emulation, kind of the whole shebang you'd expect from a offensive security testing group. So the agenda for today. We're going to go for about 35 minutes. This is a 45-minute speaking slot, so if it seems like there's going to be questions, I'll probably end a little bit early, just so we have time for that. And this is essentially what we're going to go through today. And my disclaimer is here. So everything that I'm going to talk about is based on our experience dealing with MSSPs, where we are the security service coming in, doing the work for a financial institution, healthcare company, whoever it may be, and then their MSSP, these people usually never tell them that we're coming because they want to see how they react to what's going on, right? So this is our experience and what we see coming out of that and what they're capable of, right? Like we want to give in our reports credit where credit is due. If you caught something, that's good, right? Brings risk down. And we're able to, make you look good to the audit committee, essentially, or whatever it may be, that, whoever signed the engagement letter and wanted this work done, you look better because you caught some stuff, right? So we want to be able to give that credit. We're not here to bash any vendor, right? Recommend one. We don't sell any type of service like this or a product that's going to help you in defense. And there's obviously every environment is a unique snowflake. We get that. Like, it's your baby. We're not there to call your network ugly or something like that, right? We're just trying to help you figure out like why you're missing certain things or the security holes in your environment. What I'm going to propose here is not one size fits all. It's just generally things that we have come across. They're like, hey, if you implemented this or talked to your vendor about that, maybe we would help you kind of close the gap of detections and alerts and things like that. So with that said, here's our at the top view. When we're doing these tests, we want to know this stuff. Oops. So what are you picking up as an alert? What is your MSSP picking up, right? Are they getting the basics? Are they getting the more advanced stuff? Are they getting anything at all, right? Now, typically you would think of like, has anybody here ever done a red team exercise by a security company? Okay, few, okay, awesome. Not equal to pen test. So red team, right? We're more so looking at like people, processes, detections. How could you have stopped, what we're doing as soon as possible and figured out what we did, right? Pen testing, not as much, but we still want to know, like if you're getting alerts for stuff we're doing a pen test, which is supposed to be a smash and grab operation. We're not trying to be quiet. We still want to give you credit, right? So we want to see those things. We want to see the alerts. We want to see the detections, right? We want to know how your MSSP is reacting, especially if you don't tell them that we're coming. And I usually recommend you don't tell them. Then they get mad, but whatever. And how they're responding, right? And then what they can actually tell our client about what we did once we're done, right? Do you have like a little alert over here and a little alert over here? Are they the right, criticality based on kind of what we did, things like that? Can you put a timeline together of what's going on? So here's the issues we see when we're doing this stuff. So know or few alerts. How many people have undergone a pen test before? Probably more than red team, right? Okay. So how many times have you been like, I'm paying somebody to watch this for me, and you're not satisfied with what they've come back and said, here's what's going on in the network, and we saw this and we saw that. Any raise a hand? A few hands? Okay. This guy's really shaking his head. So inability to correlate offensive actions with response. We're gonna have a couple stories here I'm gonna go over that are gonna kind of help illustrate the points that I'm making. Client aggravation. One of the worst things that happens is when we do a test of any kind, and then we ask for alerts, and then the client asks the MSSP for alerts, and then they're like, well, what did they do? Like, well, yeah, exactly. And then the client wants to get on a call with us and the MSSP, and that's always a fun time. Because then there's like a defensive thing that goes on, right, with the MSSP, and we're like, hey man, we just did this thing, I don't know what to tell you. The missed opportunities to catch us based on the above. One of the stories I'm gonna tell, this figures prominently. False negatives, also in a story, right? Those are really bad. And a lot of excuses, right? And sometimes they're valid excuses, which we'll also go over, okay? Part of the description of my talk was that it's not always the MSSP's fault, right? It could be the client's fault. So our thoughts on why some of this stuff breaks down. Non-exhaustive list. MSSP just doesn't have the telemetry they need in order to do the work effectively, right? Either client isn't proactively telling them their tech stack and where everything is, right? They're not working together once they onboard them. Or MSSP is like, hey, thanks for signing the check, we'll call you, right? There's really no back and forth after the fact to be like, here's where everything is. Okay, well, we're gonna need log data from this and system on that and yada, 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 and integrations for CrowdStrike, whatever you're using for an endpoint EDR system. Oftentimes, we've noticed when we ask the question, like those conversations didn't really happen after the check was signed. I've seen a lot of alerts. How many people in here are in charge of initially triaging an alert that comes through from an EDR product or when you get the phone call from the MSSP? I see several hands. Okay. When you see that alert, how often do you actually understand what it's telling you? No hands. Okay, one kind of hand, right? So oftentimes you'll see an alert, I'll be like, obfuscated PowerShell, this, that, the other thing, cmd.exe, this subprocess, and you're like, I don't know what the hell that means, right? What are you telling me? Well, how do I make this actionable? Oftentimes the burden's too heavily placed on our clients, right? So again, check gets signed, and then the client's like, okay, now what? And it's the whole I'll call you when something bad happens situation, and then something happens, and then they don't get the call, and they're like, I don't know what to do. Like, I thought we were paying somebody else to do this. I'm just Ted, the IT guy, and I have 17 different jobs, and apparently this is one of them, and I don't know how to do it because we outsourced this, I thought. The difference between MSP and MSSP, from what I've noticed, especially like recently, is getting very, very cloudy, okay? MSP was supposed to just keep your blinky lights blinking, right? Add users, manage your AD environment, maybe your cloud, whatever it may be, right? MSSP is almost entirely security focused, right? Knock versus sock, okay? MSPs are like, yeah, we'll sell you an EDR product, right? And we'll sell you MDR, we'll sell you this, we'll sell you that. And then all of a sudden there's this cloudy relationship after they sell you that thing of like, yeah, but like who actually watches it? Because you guys are just supposed to like keep the blinky lights blinking. Wait, so who's actually monitoring this? How do I get in touch with them? Like it's this weird, just boiling pot of stuff and you don't really know what's in it or what's gonna come out of it. MSSP does not know the actual tech stack that the MSP implemented, right? Asset management issues, essentially, right? You get back to basics here. You can't really have an alert or a detection for something that you don't even know exists on your network. This one really gets me, not probably configuring the endpoint detection system or the SIM or whatever it may be that your MSSP is putting out there for your use or that they're using to monitor your environment, right? They have like a default installation of whatever it is. They haven't tuned it. They don't keep the detections and the fingerprints and the hashes of malware and stuff up to date, right? I just basically said the same thing here. SIM has been deployed as default configuration. No customized rules, detection, nothing, right? They're just, yeah, her. Here you go, this is yours. So, I don't know why that's going in a different order, that's fine. Now, why does all that happen, right? Client not providing what the MSSP needs to actually do the work, right? So again, they buy the thing because they're like, well, we're supposed to have this, or like insurance policy says we have to have this thing, right? We don't necessarily know like how it works or how they integrate in our environment, so we're hoping that they're gonna tell us how that works, but if we don't know what to give them and they don't know what to ask us for, there's gonna be some problems, right? Tangled security controls, another part of one of my stories. It's like 2 different EDRs for a very small network. And neither of them integrated into the same SIM. So there's a lot of random stuff going on in the environment that they can't piece together. Wrong vendor choice. So everybody in this room probably knows the big ones, the big MSSPs that are very, very expensive, right? Why are you paying for that if you're like a 20-person small business or medium-sized business, right? Like there's others out there. Again, I'm not gonna name names, but you know who I'm talking about. Contract issues. Client didn't read it, vendor didn't explain it. It's not in the contract when something goes wrong, right? Or, here's one, the guy that signed it quit, and then the guy that's now in charge of the thing that was signed didn't even know that there was a contract in place for it, doesn't know what they're supposed to be doing, and there's that breakdown, right? So even if they understand that something is not working the way it's supposed to by the MSSP, or they're not getting what they should out of it, they don't even know where to start asking the questions of like, well, what do we have implemented in the first place? Who signed this? Our network's grown since then, or it's shrunk since then, right? We have different tech stack now. So what are you paying for, right? And sometimes it's just snake oil. We'll detect everything. You're gonna be fine. Don't you worry about it. We'll call you. All right, so story time. So we had a red team. This client was not ready for a red team, but they insisted that they have a red team, so a red team they got. They don't tell their MSSP. It was a big one. Again, you know who they are, all of them. Hardly any alerts. No alerts that you could actually say, like, they did this, then they did this, then they did this, then we saw them do that, right? There was no timeline. It was a random alert here, random alert there. Now, given this client size and that we knew, based on the bureaucracy of this particular organization, that if we truly snuck under the radar, it was gonna be a whole can of worms, and there's gonna be a lot of phone calls and angry people, and the IT manager getting angry, and the security people getting angry. It was a whole thing, right? Again, they weren't ready for a red team, so we didn't do like a full-blown, like, we're going to really put you through it, right? We gave them some gimmies, some easy stuff, right? That should be easily detectable. So we do our after-action review, report, readout, whatever you guys want to call it. Ton of logs, right? But no alerts. A log is not an alert, right? Alerts come from logs. There was a false negative. And again, this is basically what we did. Who here knows what Cobalt Strike is? Okay, a lot of hands, right? So we use that to exfiltrate a gigabyte file, right? That's a massive file exfiltration that should be noticed, okay? It was noticed. MSSP calls the client. Yeah, MSSP calls the client. Hey, you know what this is? It was a medium alert for going out to a random Cloudflare domain that like has just a bunch of numbers, right? They're like, no, I mean, it's probably us. Like, again, red team, you don't really tell a lot of people what's going on. So the person who answered was like, yeah, I think that was probably us. Makes sense. The guy's like, okay, fine. No more questions asked. We're not going to look into this anymore. Closes the ticket. Later on, an internal person, a very diligent internal person, one of those people who wears like 17 hats in the IT department, happened to look at one of the 2 MDR solutions they had and noticed this weird alert that popped up and was like, he literally calls us and he's like, hey, is this you? Because my MSSP is telling me it's not. It looks like you. It's a weird cloud. I'm like, wow, okay. So the client detects it. The MSSP is like, whatever. They said it was them. Not going to think about it anymore. So client's not happy, right? So what happened? They had 2 different MSSPs, okay, with 2 different managed SOC environments, 2 different MDR solutions, okay? They didn't talk to each other, right? One of them starts with a T and ends in Aegis. The other one was a Dell product, I think. Neither were talking to each other. That's not necessarily their fault. That's where the client comes in, right? The client should probably know what they're paying for, what's in their environment, and that everything should kind of integrate into one location so that you can actually do this stuff. Like I said, didn't talk to each other, so things were missed, right? One was monitoring passively. The other one was not even an MDR product. I think I said they both were. One was not. The one that was not MDR was the one that the client caught. The MDR was the one that called and didn't essentially say anything except for, okay, fine, sounds good to me, close medium ticket. So, like I said, we were doing this. A gigabyte file outbound, okay? Hosted via CloudFront. This is a very clear indicator that something weird is going on. Like, attackers do a lot of this stuff, right? And basically, with clearer lines of communication, right, which we figured out after, they probably would have caught us like this, right? Like, we can attribute this to you, period. Within 12 hours, essentially. Again, small client, not super technically savvy or security savvy, but again, they wanted a red team because they heard it somewhere and it sounded cool, so that's what they wanted. And within 12 hours, if they had had all this stuff integrated properly, they probably would have caught us, right? Like I said, we weren't trying to be super sneaky. Even if we were, maybe they still would have caught us, right? If everything was flowing in the right direction. So now what they're doing is they ripped out one product, they went with one in their entire stack, bunch of integrations now, right? And now they're detecting a lot of stuff, right? Because they didn't realize what was going on. This comes back to like, what's in the contract, who signed it? Why do we have two different vendors, by the way, when we're not even that big a company? You can make the argument that, okay, CrowdStrike on hosts, our endpoints, servers have SentinelOne, especially with what's happened recently with CrowdStrike, you know, and then domain controller, whatever it is, right? But this is a small company. They have no reason to have multiple EDR products, but they did, and nobody really understood why. So now they don't, which is good. Second story. Threat emulation assessment. Anybody undergone one of these? Threat em, people call it purple team if you're cool. A couple people, okay. So basically what this is, if people don't know, we more or less sit across the desk from somebody and say, hey, we're gonna emulate or simulate either a known attack or a type of attack, generally broad type of attack pattern that your type of organization would undergo if somebody decided to come after you. Hey, we just did this that they typically do. Did you see it, yes or no? What's your telemetry look like? Did you get an alert? Was it just logged? Okay, maybe you create a detection for that, and on and on and on, right? We're not trying to be secret. It's very back and forth, very team-based, right? So they didn't tell their MSSP about this one either. So we emulated some ransomware TTPs, post-compromise scenario. We're already in, okay, now what? If somebody was gonna, a general ransomware type threat was gonna be in the environment. They gave us a stable machine, right? So like your typical end user endpoint with a standard domain user account on the network, just like somebody who was gonna actually perform the stack might land on and have, right? Once that's how they get in somehow. We didn't ask them to allow us through any of their endpoint controls, right? That's kind of the point of this test. We want the standard security setup, essentially, on a user endpoint. And we got full domain compromise with very noisy tradecraft, right? Again, we were doing some of the standard stuff that like you should easily get caught, some of the stuff that maybe won't get caught so easily, depending upon the environment and the tooling you're using, right? But we just kind of went smash and grab to see what would happen, and there was just nothing. Silence on the wire. No alerts. MSSP had no alerts. Again, and a really big one. Nothing. Like literally nothing. It was unbelievable. Like adding standard users to like the domain. I mean, at the end we were just doing stuff to see if something would happen. We were just basically kicking, being like, say something, right? So client's obviously not happy. So what happened here? So the MSSP obviously is responsible for doing this stuff. That's what they're getting paid a lot of money for, right? They apparently had rolled out some new config to their MDR solution on endpoints, right? Nothing being captured because somebody made a mistake in a config file or something. Okay, we didn't fully get back to the bottom of it, or down to the bottom of it, but this is essentially what happened. Not integrated with the SIM solution because of this mistake, right? So nothing being captured at all, period. Nothing. Trust eroded. The client tried to claw back $100,000 from this vendor and threatened legal action because of this. What if this was a breach, right? Trust eroded. What if it's a real breach? Like 100 grand? Like, it could be peanuts. So what can you do about all this? Make sure you read the contract. I know they're boring. Like, make sure you know what you're getting for the price. Right? You should know what they're going to deploy, how they're going to deploy it, what systems they're going to deploy it on, what kinds of configurations they use, all their tooling, all this stuff, right? You should have that on paper, very clear. Not a, hey, we'll call you, thanks. Like, we're going to have you rolled out in 20 minutes and you'll be good. I see a lot of vendors over there being like, we'll have you up in 15 minutes. Like, yeah, but then what? Like, what happens after that? Does the client get any training or understanding at all of how this system works? I've onboarded 2 or 3 tools recently where I don't. I'm still trying to figure out how a tool works that we paid $15,000 for, right? So like, make sure you know what you're getting. Asset inventory. This is where it's on the client. You have to know what's in your environment. How are they supposed to detect something if they don't know what's there, right? Unless they're also part of the contract, they're going to do like asset discovery and figure out what's on your network, and that's going to be part of it. Can't monitor what you don't exist, right? There needs to be clear delineation of what the MSSP is going to do and what you are responsible for. Yeah, most of it should be on them because you're paying them tens of thousands of dollars a year depending upon the size of your organization. But there's a lot of stuff that's going to be on you as a client that's buying this. Like I said, asset inventory, if you make changes in your environment, if your MSP makes changes in the environment that would affect their ability to do their job, right? There needs to be back and forth there. Ask what their standard detections kind of like. What do they use to do this? What's their EDR? Do you have a choice of EDR? Do they use Sysmon? What do they do? How do they do it? Ask those questions. What are you getting? Do they detect ask them, can you detect a password spray attack against a domain controller? Like, that's a very, very, very easy one to pick up on. Who here knows what Kerber roasting is? A few hands. You can't pick up on that? Come on, right? You should be able to pick up on that stuff. If they're like, what's that? When you ask the, oh boy. Do you have to use their EDR? Are they selling you a platform that they're skimming off the top of, essentially, right? There are some, or a lot, I guess, of companies out there that'll be like, I'm your MSP. We'll get back to that. I'm not your MSSP. I'm your MSP. We like Wacure Circs. I'm not going to say their actual name. We like SecureWorks. I'll say it. And we're going to sell that to you. But it's going to cost like maybe $2,000, $3,000 more than it normally would because we're taking a chunk of the fee in order to sell you SecureWorks after the fact, right? So ideally, you have choices for what EDR you're going to get and what kinds of integrations it has, right? So if it's CrowdStrike, right, or whatever it is, or the SIM rather, what kinds of integrations does that have? Does it ingest from CrowdStrike? Does it have, basically anything, like all of your stuff, right? Entra, Azure, for those who don't know that it changed the name to Entra. AWS, G Suite, whatever you're using, right? Does it have the ability to ingest data from that and then create a story when something bad happens? What's their SLA for malicious activity? When do they pick up the phone, right? How entitled, or not entitled, how empowered are you? And this is going back to the issue of unreadable alerts, right? That you might get on your admin center of like one of these EDR products, for instance. Is it easy when something bad goes wrong to see exactly what happened, how it happened, and whether or not you need to contact your vendor to be like, hey, I think something real is going on right now, right? Are you empowered to do that? Because that's great if you are. I've seen some smaller companies out there that kind of focus on small, medium businesses, and they provide SOC services, managed detection response, all that stuff. And I had them walk me through a demo just because I was curious, because a lot of our clients are small, medium business, right? And they literally have like the admin dashboard pops up when something happens and it's like, hey, we detected a potential whatever kind of attack on this host from this IP. Was this you? Do you have any idea what it is, right? And here's the steps you can go through before we get on the phone so that you can triage it yourself a little bit. Like, did this happen, yes or no? Did you notice an alert here, yes or no? Run this command, see what the output is. If it says this, you need to call us. right? Or whatever, just like a medium, maybe a high. A critical, they're gonna pick up the phone regardless and just call you first, right? But they empower you to do the work a little bit, especially for somebody who doesn't know how to do this stuff, right? Again, Sean in IT that has 17 different hats in the business, I'm sure there's a few of those people in this room right now that have 17 different hats, right? The easier it makes, the easier they make it for you, the better. So again, how are they like actually detecting this stuff? I talked about this a little bit. Do they have their own agent? Are they monitoring EDR only, without Sysmon, with Sysmon? Like how are they doing all of this stuff? Do they have network sensors? I don't remember the last time I saw somebody roll out an actual network sensor that was an MSP, or MSSP rather, to actually get like east-west traffic as opposed to just what goes through the firewall. What's that? You have one? Okay, how's it working? Did the MSP or MSSP set it up for you, or did you guys buy it? Oh, okay. Oh, so he's one of the ones that's in the room that I need to be careful. Okay, great. We'll talk after. What do they support? Do they only do on-prem? Can they do cloud? The big thing these days is identity. What can they do about that, right? Can they detect a business email compromise? Can they detect, when somebody's rooting around, your CIO's inbox and it's kind of strange behavior, right? Can they detect when like a bad mail forwarding rule has been detected or has been created within Outlook, right? That kind of forwards emails somewhere that they probably shouldn't be going because somebody performed a business email compromise, right? Can they tell when somebody's logging in from a strange location that isn't normal, right? We're all in the cloud now, right? So they need to be able to do this stuff because everybody out there, especially since COVID, most people have some type of productivity suite like Microsoft 365 or whatever in the cloud, and that's kind of a lot of our work and a lot of our pen testing is like moving in that direction, right? There's a lot of legacy AD domains out there. They're fun to root around in, but the real pudding is like in Entra, Azure, Microsoft 365, AWS, right? How often do they like update their detection logic? And I might have a bullet point about this, I don't remember. Are they out on the speaking circuit? Do you see them at events? Do they have their technical people there? Can you talk to their technical people? When you're doing a scope call, do they just have salespeople, like 7 salespeople on the phone and not a single person that speaks your language? When you're trying to figure out how their product works? These are all things to think about, right? What kinds of ongoing interaction? Do you have to pay them for them to answer the phone when there's not a critical event that's going on? Right? Can you ask them questions? I'm not saying you should hound them 2 hours every week and try to get on conference calls, but within reason. And again, are you providing them with what they need to get the job done, right? Again, I keep harping on that because it's important. Oftentimes there's breakdowns and people not getting what they're supposed to be getting to get what they want out of their product. So here's some questions for you. If you have a pen test, you have a red team done, whatever it may be, or threat emulation, okay? I talked about password spraying attacks against a domain controller. If they can't detect this, then they're probably not going to detect a lot of other things, right? So keep a lookout for that one. Kerberoasting attacks, I already talked about. New admin accounts created, right? I feel like this is just par for the course at this point. If I have a domain user account that randomly ends up with domain admin rights, you should probably know that that happened, right? Because if you have good user management and controls, things like that, like you know when somebody did that on purpose and when it's just a surprise that never should have happened. Memory dumping attacks. I remember, it still happens occasionally today, but even a year and a half ago, when we would get administrative rights to like a server or a Windows endpoint, like just Windows 10, Windows 11, whatever, right? It was easy just to dump plain text credentials out of memory in Windows, right? Nobody detected it. Now, so many people detect it. So if they don't detect it, whoever you're using can't detect it. When somebody dumps like plain text credentials from LSAS space, right, on an endpoint, that's a huge problem. Like that is, again, par for the course these days. Not so far along, or not so long ago, like I said, it was easy. You could do this all day. You could literally do it against an entire subnet and they wouldn't even detect it all at one time in a pen test. So this should absolutely be picked up on. Already talked about users being added to admin groups. known malicious PowerShell. Again, with the alerts, there's so many that we see out there that we get samples of when we do these exercises. They're like, here's the alert, here's all the alerts we got, and we can't even understand what they're doing, what they're talking about, because the PowerShell script is like encoded, and then base 64 and this and that and whatever, and it's like, how is anybody supposed to make any sense out of any of this, right? But they should still be able to detect it, and ideally, they should be able to break down what it was doing and tell you that in plain English. Who knows what Bloodhound is? A couple people. You have a few offensive security people in here. That's cool. It can be used for blue, too. Don't sleep on it, and it's free. They have an enterprise version, but it's free if you want to use it for defense. Basically what it does is you give it a user account, standard user account, and it will just go hog on your entire AD domain and pull group policies, organizational units, GPOs, like everything, right? Computers, users, who has a session on what host, right? There's so much data in there, right? But it's noisy as hell. So they should probably be picking up on this too. To this day, I can think of like maybe five times somebody's been like, we saw you run Bloodhound. We know you did that. I don't know why. I don't understand why it's so hard to detect. There's all kinds of detection logic out there for it that for some reason is not being universally integrated. List goes on. So if you're single and looking for an MSSP, keep an eye out for, do they update you on updates to their platform and what they're doing? Like what have they been working on, right? Oh, we have new detections for this, or we integrated this into our SIM solution, or we added the following rule, whatever. If you want to dig into it, click this link and we'll show you everything we've added and these new detections and the MITRE attack framework and this and that and everybody, right? They should have that information and they should be actively keeping up. Do you have access to their platform? Right? I'm sure you probably have access to the administrative console, like for like whatever they give you for like an EDR or an MDR solution somewhere in your SOC or in your NOC. But do they ever give you like roll-up reports, like weekly, monthly, whatever? What's in them, right? Like, do you get to see how the pudding is being made? Do you have a choice in the EDR? We already talked about this, right? Some are better than others. I'm not going to get into that. I talked about this. Are they open to regular comms, right? Can you pick up the phone and call them? Ask questions, right? Hey, I'm worried about this new attack that just came out. What are you guys doing about it? We are particularly vulnerable to this because we have those systems, either internet-facing or internally. What are you guys doing about it? Is this in the platform? What's going on? Like, when is the detection for this going to come out? I know it's adding work to the people's plates who have to make those phone calls, right? So like I said at the beginning, this is not a one-size-fits-all solution board here. But if you have the time, try to be more proactive with them. Are they hands-on throughout onboarding, right? Is it we'll deploy you in 30 minutes and then we'll talk to you when the sales engineer checks in with you once a month or once every 6 months to see how it's going? Like I said, alerts, clear, easy to read, right? Even if they miss it, for whatever reason, the MSSP, I mean, you get the alert and the admin console for the ER platform, or whatever it is, can you make sense of it so at least it's not getting missed completely, right? And you've cut down that time to detection. Is the contract clear, right? Can you read it, right? Like, is it just like sign here, it's, oh, this is all just boilerplate, don't worry about it. No. I want to know what's in it first. And like I said, are there people active in the security community, right? Like, like I said, are they here? Right, this is a huge conference. Like, are they here? Do they have technical people here? Can you ask them questions about, especially if you're already buying their product, right? Like, what do you got coming out lately? Like what's the newest thing? Hey, have you heard about this new way of detecting that? Whatever, right? Are they speaking here? Are they a member of the, I guess you could say, I don't want to say nerd community, but like, do they send those people to their conferences and actually integrate with the people, talk to them? Like, are they vested? You know what I mean? Is it passionate for them? Is it a passion for them to be doing this work? So that's more or less my time. I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions. I did want to talk about, we have a game. Who here knows backdoors and breaches? There should be more hands than that. Well, if you come to our booth, 521, we'll talk to you about it. Basically, we worked with Black Hills Information Security. We created our expansion deck for this game. It's basically an incident response card game that's based on Dungeons & Dragons. A lot of you are nerds. You should know what that is. And we have D20 die. So come by. We'll talk about it. And they're free. We're not charging for them. Additional resources here. Like I said, if this gets shared, you can click on these. They're not phishing links, I swear. We have blogs, yada, yada, yada. Questions? Go ahead.
She has to speak in the microphone, okay?
Gotcha, boss. Okay, so I know in story one you were talking about the lack of communication, lack of interoperability between the MSSP or the two at that point, leadership, the boots on the ground, and your team.
Right.
But yet you said that they weren't ready for a red team, and I'm trying to think because I've done red team exercises, I've done tabletop exercises, we've done pen test, breach and attack, and all that stuff, and I'm wondering something like this probably, although they weren't ready for it, that kind of what else would you have offered to get them ready? Because at the tabletop exercise, of course, everybody's ready for everything. Mm-hmm. This happens. What do you do? Well, we would call this. Well, we would do this. There's a lot of theoretical stuff.
Right.
During a pen test. Again, same thing. You're not going to see anything anyway. And it's more of an external, internal. You're concentrating usually like we do. We concentrate on certain areas every quarter. We'll do a pen test on a different area
right.
of the thing. So, what would you offer them versus the red team? Because at that point, you're just throwing a grenade in, and then you see what happens.
Right. Yeah. So we had been doing their pen tests every year, and they randomly decided they wanted to do a red team, and we're like, you haven't fixed this stuff for the last 3 years. Why would we do a red team? Right? You're not even getting the little stuff. But if you're going to insist on paying us tens of thousands of dollars for a red team, I guess we'll agree. Right? So it's one of the, and it's like, again, you didn't detect a lot of the stuff, right? The pen test stuff you didn't detect. Now you're going to all of a sudden do well here. It does have, sorry? Yeah. Right. Like it has value in the sense that they're still getting pieces of the puzzle, but they haven't put a lot of the puzzle together yet first to then add on to the rest of the puzzle, I guess is a way to put it. So does that answer the question? Okay. Anybody else? Sure.
We have an MSSP,
Mm-hmm.
and we got MDR solution with them, EDR solution with them. And if we were to decide to go to another MSSP, what are the options of still keeping that EDR solution?
So, yeah. So he was asking, if you have an MSSP and they, with them, the EDR solution comes with them, and then you decide you want to have another EDR solution but keep the MSSP?
No, move to another MSSP because we don't like their
Okay, and keep the EDR solution.
It's already deployed to all the endpoints.
Okay, yeah. So that's a really good question. Yeah, that's what I would think, right? Is like how sticky is that EDR solution with the contract that you sign? And like, we're taking our toys and going home if you don't want to go with us anymore? You know what I mean? So I don't have a solid answer for you on that one. I do have a client going through that actually right now.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. If anyone has had that experience, if you could just reach out to me. So that'd be great.
Yeah. If anybody here does have that experience, hook up with him. Otherwise, we do have a client going through that right now, and if we talk after and I get your information, I can give you more. Yeah. Anyone else? Right here.
Got a pretty rapidly growing business. Sorry.
These questions are being recorded as part of the recording.
Got a pretty rapidly growing business where we are just building out a SIM and a full security stack. It's probably even being finalized in the next several weeks. How quickly would you advise after that completion to run a pen test?
I had a feeling that's where that question was going when you started. I think it's nice to have a baseline, right? So like once you're like, okay, this is deployed, we're pretty sure that it's detecting all the things it's supposed to detect, and it's getting all the integrations, and the logs are going where they're supposed to, and the SLAs are cleared, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I think it makes sense to do one, right, and see. So I don't know, you said this is a new business?
It's been around for several years, but growth has been explosive in the last year.
Okay, I got you. So yeah, I mean, I would say, I don't know if you've ever had a pen test done before this happened or this is the first time. Yeah, so I would say do a baseline and see what happens, right? I'm not gonna certainly don't do a red team, right? Like that client I was talking about. Maybe you consider doing threat emulation, right? Because then you're literally having a back and forth with like, let's emulate or simulate either an actual like APT, which I don't know what you do, but most people probably don't have to worry about APTs. You have to worry about opportunistic attacks, right? So maybe like a simulation of various types of things that might make sense for your org, right? And see what gets picked up, see what you detect, right? And you can kind of get a good baseline there of like, okay, well, we saw this, like reasonably could we put together an attack chain and figure out what's going on and stop it before it becomes a problem, right? So either that or a pen test, to be honest. I think both would probably be helpful. Once you feel comfortable, you're good to go and everything's deployed. Thanks. Sure.
Kind of piggybacking off of his question up there, but how often do y'all see clients going from MSP to MSP? And I don't know if you're able to answer this question at all, but how do y'all handle that? Like, say that they are going from one MSP to y'all, they have that solution, it's relatively sticky, or they don't want to leave that solution, but they just are tired of the MSP that they are utilizing, and they're like, okay, we like your approach better. How do y'all handle that?
From like a client services, like vendor perspective, when we're the ones providing the testing, like how do we help them navigate that, or is that what you're saying?
From a client's perspective, working with y'all, like going from the current provider that they have, coming over to y'all, how do y'all work with them in basically making it flow?
Okay. So our services aren't necessarily like, we don't manage that. Essentially, we're doing like the offensive security style stuff. And my team is, right? So let's say they had, I don't know, CrowdStrike, and they're like, we don't want that. We want SentinelOne, or we're just gonna go Windows Defender or Sentinel, whatever it is, right? Well, maybe we've done a pen test with them before, right? And maybe that's why, like they weren't happy with CrowdStrike or whatever it is, for whatever reason they're moving. Okay, fine, well, once you're ready, and if you want to, we'll do a pen test after the fact to see how SentinelOne's holding up, right? Or like a model validation style thing, right? Which is essentially threat emulation, right? We're testing the CrowdStrike model, we're testing the SentinelOne model, we're seeing how each do compared to each other, right? But we would come in after the fact, after that's deployed, and then test it for you. We wouldn't necessarily help you roll out and change throughout the process, right? Does that answer the question? Okay. Anyone else? We got 2 minutes. If you're shy, we can talk after. It's fine. Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Joe. Manager and lead pen tester for Densecure with Wolf & Company. Thank you, guys.